Now, perhaps that is it.
Now we're live.
Okay, I'm just waiting to see it on the iPad.
Might take a second.
Maybe I need to refresh it or something. Discussion. It looks like it should be happening now.
It's recording now live.
No. Well, that's still mine. I don't understand.
Lisa, I think it's on there.
I think we're on. I think we're live.
Can you see it on your iPad? I don't see it on this one.
I'm looking on my phone here, but I think we're on. So. Yep, we're live. Hi, guys.
Hello. All righty then. I'll take your word for it. I don't know why mine's not working, I guess. Anyway, so good evening to everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lisa Williams of the Johnson City Public Library, and with me tonight are Joy Fulkerson of ETSU and my fellow librarian, Lisa Krekelberg. This week, we launched the library's Own Voices Winter Reading Challenge, and that encourages readers to seek out authors of different backgrounds and identities. I couldn't think of a better way to kick off that challenge than to invite everyone in to a conversation tonight with Joy, who's Director of Leadership and Civic Engagement at East Tennessee State University. In her role at ETSU, she provides leadership for community service, learning and engagement projects by building partnerships with local nonprofits, with governmental agencies, and national nonpartisan organizations. She's an advocate for social justice, equity, and inclusion, and she's also a past president of the Johnson City Public Library's Board of Directors. So welcome. Thank you, Joy, for being here with us tonight. It's just so great to have you. And I want to say one thing quickly to audience members. You are welcome to send questions through the comment box on our Facebook page and chime in anytime you have one of those, and I'll relay those on to Joy. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight. As you know, I love the Johnson City Public Library, and I'm really pleased with this new initiative, this new winter challenge, particularly focused on hearing really diverse voices. So I'm really excited about our conversation tonight.
Yes, me too. Been looking forward to it since we thought it up.
It's thrilling. This is going to be wonderful. I think we were just talking before this started how impactful Own Voices might be. It's something we've never tried before at the library, and it's just something that I think our whole world, but our community, of course, can benefit from, learning from all of the different people who are represented in our local community here in Johnson City, here in Washington County. This is going to be, and I think Joy tonight is going to give us some wonderful tools to help us just spark some of those conversations and make sure that as we're talking together with people from different perspectives, that we're doing so in ways that build bridges and help to grow the conversation and make a positive impact.
That's great. And, you know, I shared this last night as I was sort of doing some last minute prep and just, you know, myself sort of soaking up as much information as I can about this topic. I am not an expert. You know, I was sharing with Lisa earlier today that we sort of learn and grow together. And so, again, I too welcome folks that are joining us via Facebook to ask questions or to throw out pieces and parts. And my hope is that Lisa, you and Lisa that we can just really have a conversation, that we can really just talk through what that looks like in terms of, and you know, I think I struggle a little bit even sometimes when we were talking about titles of this kind of conversation tonight and what's the right words, and sadly in our world today, I think many of the words we talk about sometimes have gotten you know, they have become somewhat watered down or somewhat jaded. You know, people, when you hear the word civility, sometimes people, I think, think that, I just don't know that those are words that people sort of attract themselves to. But at the end of the day, we're just really talking about how best do we have meaningful, impactful, respectful conversations. And for me, again, Lisa and I were able to chat a little bit earlier today, and thinking through how rich my life is, how much more rich my life is, because I am surrounded by people who are different from me. And not that I have always sort of been open to thinking about new ways of things, but that, once I am more open to those, that I have really learned and grown, and I just value different perspectives. I think we are all better for it. So again, just really appreciate the work that you all are doing and bringing those different voices to our community through books and films and other media. I think it's really, really important, and looking forward to the entire series myself.
Mhm. Yeah. And that's got to be one of the great fun parts about being a librarian, is getting to look for those things and share those things and see people, just respond and connect to things that they hadn't thought about before too. And
Well, and our access to diverse voices here where we are, just, by virtue of our own location. I mean, we're limited in having, I have shared plenty of times that I can go throughout my entire day and not see someone who looks like me.
Mhm.
And so really the opportunities that people have to sort of be connected to different people. And when you're not, I think that's the beauty of the book, right? That's the beauty of the book. And I know that you all shared this in your blog that sort of kicked off this piece, but this whole idea that books are doors and windows, that again, give us access to things that we might not have directly available to us. So.
And I think sometimes there's a high value too when you go out and when you need to seek other viewpoints. You're already in a little bit more of a frame of mind to be receptive to it when you've gone to seek. When you picked up that book, and because there's a spark of curiosity and the openness there to begin with, and that's not a bad beginning.
Well, and can be a good beginning in terms of some safety too. So, before I might have to engage with a person in real life, a real human, perhaps, I'm able to go and get a better understanding of that voice, if you will, through a book. And so there's a little bit of safety initially as well. I think if you think about the positives that can come from that.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah. Lisa, tell me a little bit about, I know you sort of talked about your own interest in this kind of thing, and you sort of kick us off, and then we can sort of move into them.
So I really got interested in thinking about this specifically, kind of about conversation skills, and from a conference that I went to last winter. It was a library conference, and they had a workshop they actually called it Hot Topics, I think. And they were pairing some communication skills with also some media literacy skills, and fact checking, things like that. But I took away from it so much just from what they had to teach about thinking about how you communicate, being very conscious and intentional, and especially when a situation that you're in makes you feel stressed or confused or insecure, any of those, in those moments, if we can kind of think through in our mind, just, almost like a checklist of things, that can be having that structure to, is really useful, in feeling like, and that resonated with me a lot, to go, I can learn to be better at this.
Well, and of course, the topic is so timely as well, just because you talk about stressful conversations or stressful situations. I mean, we're living in that. I mean, I think all of us are somewhat on edge about beginning to engage with friends, family, coworkers, around a lot of topics. And so I think really, I've shared this before with people that we practice so much. If you play sports, we practice being better at basketball or football or track or what have you. If you play a musical instrument, we practice playing piano or playing the flute or what have you, playing the drums, whatever it is. We practice so many things, but we don't really take time to practice how to engage with others who might be different from us. And so that's part of really this conversation too. And hopefully some tips. And again, by no means, hear me clearly, all of you, that I am no expert, that I have just sort of had the privilege of learning, receiving information from a number of different sources. And then it's just really been some trial and error and some practice, and I think I was listening to Brene Brown. Many of you probably know her and her work, but just around courage and being brave and being vulnerable, all those things play into to this conversation as well, and sort of just being willing to step out there and being, sort of, for me, sort of this starting with, I might mess up, sort of just knowing that I might and probably will, but not letting that keep me from engaging. And hopefully, we can all sort of be granted some grace and sort of learn and grow together too. So, it's interesting. I think you mentioned the hot topics pieces, and of course I've looked through that a little bit more so, and several other resources about where do you begin. And some of it I think is even beginning with thinking through our own, doing some self-work even prior to the conversation time being upon us. So perhaps I need to think about what my own experience, and I'm thinking, I'm talking around issues of diversity, if you will, or different voices or people, concepts, ideas, things that are different from my own. But I might need to think about, checking my own biases or reflecting upon my own knowledge about particular things, so that when I am faced with an opportunity to engage in a conversation, that I've done a little bit of that and might have already identified some places of where I might be triggered, if you will, which is an interesting kind of word, I know, but or a place where I might get defensive, or a place where I might be uncomfortable, right? So if I've done a little bit about that work at the beginning, and then I think when we are faced, this whole thing of, is now the time to engage? Is now the time to engage? And so I think, thinking through, are both parties, me and another person, is this the right time for me to talk with Lisa about this topic, right? And sometimes we don't have those opportunities to choose not to talk about it. Sometimes it's just going to happen. And so, but I think doing some internal work about, are we open to and willing to hear something different from our own, perhaps, position or perspective. And again, as much as we can, when we are able to also consider body language. I mean, we know that we were talking about this the other day too, Lisa, about communication is, there's verbal and nonverbal, and then communication. We'll talk a little bit about, what I believe I need to be better at is, being willing to listen and to hear. I mean, that's part of what this is about too, is being willing to listen and to hear other people's voices. But our body language can send a whole lot of messages too. Are we welcoming to a conversation, or are we sort of putting up perhaps barriers or being defensive? So, I think there's just some things that we can do initially and just take into consideration and consider before truly engaging in the conversation.
Mm-hmm. And I think to develop a certain amount of comfort with feeling awkward or uncomfortable, is something to think about. And so if you have a moment, I think some of the some discomfort that people have is just, I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Mhm.
I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't have the experience. I don't trust myself. I'm not confident enough. I don't want to come across in a wrong way. And then you sort of think yourself into a place where you can't can't come up with anything good.
It's sort of interesting because I think there's this spectrum of folks. There's those who choose not to engage at all, which I wish they would. And then there's some who go in, feet first, all feet, heavy in, right? And we talk a little bit about what's our intent as well for engaging in the conversation. But, most of us, I think, oftentimes are just, which is why we need to practice it, because we have to sort of build those skills and build our confidence in engaging. But I think when we approach it from a well-intended, right, that it's, I think others are willing to give us some grace, I think,
Probably harder on ourselves sometimes than, and just developing a certain amount of tolerance for saying, well, I feel awkward, but it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if I want to get more comfortable, I've got to experience some of that and just be okay and sitting with that and not necessarily feel like I have to do something. Just
Yeah.
to listen sometimes.
Right. Well, and just building, the other thing about relationships and engaging in conversation is really about this idea of building trust too. And so, I might not immediately, you need to consider how, we don't need to begin. The first time I talk to you may not need to be the first time I ask you about the most controversial topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
I might want to begin developing a relationship with you and really getting to know you and your experience before we are moving into deeper conversations, if you will. It's in our work, we are oftentimes doing, name games and icebreakers and those kind of things. And there is some level of, developmental timeline-ish kind of things where if we're new to each other, I need to be mindful of risk that might be at play if I'm asking some particular questions before we've established this sense of trust with each other. So I think trust is important in these conversations for sure.
And I think just what you were saying about tone of voice, body language, things like that go a long way to help start building the trust there.
Mm-hmm.
And you just, to a degree, have to have a certain amount of that exchange and back and forth. A bridge is kind of built one chunk at a time. And
my friends talk about this. If I met you, I probably, and I actually, when I just asked you a question, Lisa, I was like, oh my gosh, I am not the person interviewing you. You're supposed to be talking with me. But because I am known to really ask a lot of questions, I love getting to know people. And I think that's where also the sense of trust and camaraderie and finding common ground. And, but, I think there's also some safety in asking questions. So, if someone has shared something with me, whether that be, anything more superficial or to something a little more serious in terms of the kinds of conversations that we're talking about around, difference or socially, politically charged conversations, if you will. I just think always asking some additional questions can be helpful. And people have said things to me that I'm like, okay, it buys me some time to have a response, perhaps, right? Like, so, but, tell me more kinds of questions are always good. What makes you say that? Or what, maybe there's a past experience that someone has had that's been different that's been different than my own, that leads them to say or do or believe something in a certain way. And so it's just about getting to know one another. But I think asking additional questions can be a helpful tool.
Yeah,
in some challenging conversations for sure.
you're also encouraging them to do the self-reflection that you said really is the first step for us too, for them to consider deeper what they're actually saying. Because a lot of times when you have people sounding off, sometimes they're just saying the same things they've heard elsewhere. So helping them through questioning to examine that and really turn inward a bit and see, well, where is this coming from? What am I actually saying here? And also too, just in terms of, they may not mean at all what you're hearing, but to help with you clarify so that there's better mutual understanding there.
Right. That, and we learn those kind of skills actually in elementary school, middle school, this whole paraphrase and, for me to share what I heard, right? Like, I think this is what I heard you say, and allow people an opportunity to clarify or to correct, what they've said. And, the other thing about the importance of listening to other people and hearing other voices, I think I also have said, at times I have listened and learned from other people, and it has for sure confirmed sort of a belief or confirmed a piece of my own opinion or perspective on things, right? But also there are times when I've listened and learned from other people, and it has, obviously I've learned and it's changed me, right? Like I have been able to receive new information that has been helpful in maybe changing my opinion or belief around something. And then there's going to be some times when we can just, that it's not about even trying to change another's opinion or to agree. I mean, there's going to be some times in conversations where we're just going to agree to disagree. And, I think that's okay too. That's okay too.
Absolutely. And speaking of questions, send in your questions in the chat. I've been noticing there are a couple of comments coming through. We had Tricia say, so important to listen for understanding as opposed to listening to decide our own response, which absolutely. And then Georgita said that she calls that defensive listening, which I think is a really interesting way to phrase that for sure. Yeah.
It is. That's a great turn of phrase. I like that.
Yeah, I think, our natural tendencies are to immediately be thinking about our response to things versus really listening and hearing what one says. And I find sometimes that because we're so busy, right? Like we're just too, like we don't take time to really, it's like always on the go. And so I don't know how we, it just is challenging. I think our natural tendencies are to be thinking about our response to particular things versus listening and we're, lots of people are uncomfortable. Speaking of comfortable conversations, many of us are uncomfortable with silence, right? And so it's like somebody's got to be talking. And so it's like you say something and then I feel like I immediately have to have a response because we're so uncomfortable with some dead space. And then we also, Lisa, I said this to you the other day, we're not comfortable. We again, human tendency, nobody wants to be challenged necessarily or judged in some ways. And we talked about really why people choose not to engage sometimes is because they're afraid they're going to do it wrong or say something wrong. But, this whole idea too, that people get defensive, and so when you're thinking about these, again, particularly socially, politically charged conversations or things that just are very different than our own upbringing or people challenging us to think differently about a particular thing, we can get just very defensive about our stance, and part of, I think a respectful conversation and what ultimately becomes a meaningful conversation or an impactful conversation is one in which we're really all open to hearing each other, right? And being willing to listen and learn.
You mentioned body language. Another thing is like just the pacing, because when you get amped up in a conversation, the speed of it goes faster, and you're not thinking. So I think breathing really is an important technique too. You mentioned being willing to be in the space, but just taking a breath sometimes, giving that chance to reflect for sure. We had another question. Well, a question come through the chat, if you don't mind.
Okay.
What advice do you have to people who want to build relationships with people that are different than them, but their community is not diverse? What does it feel forced to seek out people different than you so that you can diversify your community? Which I think is a very interesting question. And we were talking at the beginning that you mentioned that, that Johnson City, our diversity, it's kind of hidden. I feel like we do have diversity there, but you just don't see it on a day-to-day basis. And, the way that depending on where you are and who you are too.
So the question is, I'm just pulling it up so I can read it, that what advice to people wanting to build relationships with people different than themselves?
Reach out to find those other communities to help have those conversations and learn more and grow more, which I think is great.
Yeah, I think my advice, one, and I'm willing to offer myself for those, if I can help make connections, I'm happy to do that. And I recognize that, it's one, trying to think about in what ways of diversity are you trying to expose yourself to? I mean, is that race or ethnicity or religion or, but I think if you can find a coworker or friend, or like I said, I'm happy to help make some connections too. But it's, I think there are stepping outside of your comfort zone and even going to maybe some public events. I think about times when I've just gone to some places, and sometimes it's nice if you can go with a buddy, but sometimes you go and that's where you find the buddy too, and so I think in our space, ideally a library is a perfect place if we were not in COVID times, right? The library would be bringing people together perhaps. And we talked a little bit about that before the call about, the library itself being a place where they can help curate diverse folks and help bring people together in those ways. But I think you have to ask around. I know folks at the library would be happy to help. I'm happy to help. You may have a coworker or a friend, a neighbor, but I'd like to hear, if it's, I think too, I think about religion, and again, sometimes you can, and the other thing I would say about the times that we're living in now in terms of having access to more, again, I think books, films, podcasts, all those things. I mean, the amount of information that we have available to us, I mean, obviously just via technology, even before the pandemic, but even within the pandemic, it's just much more available. I mean, literally, I could be sitting in front of a screen all day, listening and learning and hearing from something different, from whether that's here in Johnson City or across the country, and so that's also a good place where you can begin to explore and connect with people different than yourself.
I would also say the Own Voices summer winter reading challenge would be a great place, because we're going to have a lot of great events coming up where we're pulling in partners from the community, from different some of those different diverse groups represented in Johnson City. So check out the links. I've posted the link to the blog post, and I'll be posting more as we go along. But check out our Own Voices Winter Reading Challenge, the programs we have coming up like this. This is our first kickoff event. And I think those will be great opportunities to meet people who are here in our community who represent those voices and hear from them, hear them speak. We'll have book discussions. We're going to have, I think, we're going to have some just community members talking about different cultures and things like that. So look for great upcoming events through the month of January and February. We'll plug.
And
I love it.
I think there's an opportunity there too, to read reviews of the books that other people have posted. Gives you some ideas, and we're having a couple of book discussion groups where you can actually register for that and be in on a Zoom call and talk with other people who've chosen to read that same book. So we're doing two. We're doing Go Tell It on the Mountain, which is coming up pretty soon. That discussion will actually be February the 2nd. And then Southernmost, the book by Silas House, will be February the 18th. And that's a great way to get into, a forum where you can meet people and start with that foundation of what interested you about this book. Why did you want to be in this group, and why did you reach out? And just one other thought crossed my mind in reference to this question. I think maybe volunteering sometimes, if you can find a group to volunteer with and just show up and just say, how can I help? And is a great way to start to build some relationships on a really constructive footing to begin with.
Lisa, I love that. And in my day work here at the university, that service is the other component of things I get to do. And I've always said service is a great team builder. It definitely allows people to sort of come with some common ground pieces. But also, I think this whole connecting with different nonprofits who obviously are serving our community and in some ways marginalized populations within our community. I think service is a great piece. I was looking at the Facebook piece, and I just want to say thanks to a couple of friends that are on the call. But Dr. Kinzer, I'm sort of laughing that she's actually on the call, because she actually is somebody I should have invited to actually, I should say, take my place and do this. Dr. Kinzer is a faculty member in our communications department, and she and I've had lots of conversations recently just about hearing diverse voices. And so her comments, I think, are really appropriate. This whole idea of when people, she calls it conversational narcissism. I think that's when people say something and begin to steal the focus, the attention away from the speaker, and it turning the tables and it becomes about them. I think that's something just to be mindful of and to seek to avoid. Dr. Kinzer, thanks for your wisdom.
And that sparks a thought in my mind is, we're a competitive culture, and so we want to find that common ground, but also we like to have the biggest and the best story, a little bit. And I just, if Dr. Kinzer would like to shoot me a comment back about how to nip that in the bud, in the seeing, this is a doorway to, let me tell you about this great thing that happened to me.
Yeah. Well, I think we've all probably been on both sides of those coins a little bit. It's like my head hurts, but your head hurts more than my head hurts, right? Immediately it becomes about you, like you said, that one-upping. But I think in seriousness, sometimes you don't even get a chance to try to respond. I mean, it can quickly shut down the conversation, right? Because it's about that trust pieces too, right? At that point, it's just like, I've had people do that, and it's sort of it's like deflating the bubble. A balloon, it like takes a lot of the wind from the sails, because you're sort of sharing, and then they immediately sort of a little bit of hijack the conversation, right? So.
Yeah. It makes it obvious they were thinking more about what they were going to say and their story, that one little piece, than they were paying attention to what you were sharing, and ask those follow-up questions that you talked about, to build that conversation, to show that we're listening and responding in kind. Yeah. And then Julie said we see that in current events too, comparing different styles of protest, which absolutely, yeah, definitely with that one.
Right. Any other questions or directions we want to take the conversation?
Amber just said it's important to focus on, as you'll have said, on listening and understanding and learning more, affirming others with your silent attention.
Yeah, this, sometimes again, there's not a need. I mean, you can internalize that, Okay, your head hurts too, but you don't necessarily need to say that at the moment.
What about my headache? I was
Right.
Yeah, well, and this all makes me think too, Joy, you mentioned body language, and early on, online conversations can be particularly difficult, or even just your email, where you can't see the person, where you don't get those visual cues. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about that, maybe something.
Yeah, well, I think I am a face-to-facer for sure. I appreciate being, and that's been obviously challenging in the pandemic, but I think I like to be in community with people physically, and I think when you're trying to communicate, you know, in email or on social media, you have to be much more intentional about what you're saying in your words, right? Because there is not this, I don't have an opportunity to see the body language or to hear your tone. And so, but then I also think, social media, we know is just a place where people have gotten really comfortable. Talk about uncomfortable conversations, people are really comfortable on social media some, and forgetting that I think that we're still human, right? Behind those names and behind those profiles, there's actually people. And so, and it's interesting, how I'm always surprised about reading certain threads where I'm like, do these people don't even know each other really, and they're just going at it back and forth, and which I'm like, okay, though, to me, those are conversations I prefer to have with people face to face, even if it means let's get on a Zoom and talk about that or what have you. I just happen to be someone that has chosen not to really engage in a lot of, again, socially, politically charged conversations for sure on Facebook or social media in more broad terms. I want to do that, phone is nice, but even when I'm able to see your faces is what I prefer. And sadly, I think we don't have great, occasionally I might run across a thread where I think there's been some good exchange and then maybe some agreement to disagree or some agreement in terms of I hear you, I see and can feel sort of where you come from or where your perspective comes from. But most of the time, I just think we don't get there on social media. So I think that's challenging.
I think these are days where Lisa and I were talking about it a little bit before we got started, and just, being very choosy about who you do interact with at this point, because we've really seen a blossoming of, I think, some counterproductive stuff and taking good root in social media. Dr. Kinzer's got a question for you, if I may here. Do you have any thoughts on how to do difficult conversations about race with family members?
It's interesting about family. I think sometimes we are harder on our family than we may be on other people, right? So family is tricky for sure. Family is tricky. And the conversation around race, obviously, whether that's with friends or family or coworkers, race can be a very tricky conversation. And so I don't know that I have very different pieces of advice for family members as I would just anyone. I think is again trying to think through your own relationship with those family members. Setting some guidelines or boundaries, sort of thinking through, from what place are we going to engage, and a little bit of tiptoeing and testing the water a little bit, perhaps. Is there some common ground that can be found? I think, again, is there something that we could, a book or a news article or a film or a movie or something, is there something that could ground our conversation or that could center our conversation, I think can be helpful. And maybe doing an activity together, it would be interesting to think about, could you get a family member to, the both of you do perhaps an implicit association or bias test, and sort of just share responses, but thinking through, is there something that we can do together that might us set some common ground? And then, I think when we start talking about race too, it can become a little emotional and it's big. I mean, it's big. Are we talking about local pieces? Are we obviously talking about the structural and the institutional pieces? Race has become really multi-layered, and we could talk about race all day long. And then, the latter parts of the things I would say about, and again, I don't know that I would say this is different for family members as it is for other people. I think it all works for the same. But again, there are going to be some times when we're not going to have that conversation, or we're going to need to agree to disagree. And again, I think that's why it's important to sort of have some boundaries and set some goals. What are you trying to accomplish in having this conversation? I think someone told me a little bit, I think it actually came from some colleagues here on campus, where they were talking about sort of what is the end goal, or what's your purpose? And are you trying to save or salvage, maintain, this relationship with a family member? So it sort of thinks about what is the goal of, because depending on the goal, you might choose to act a little differently, right? Like you might do one thing if this is the goal versus another. And again, at the end of the day, that might be agreeing to disagree, or it may be choosing not to engage in the conversation at all. And then I think we can also be open about how, when we talk about the emotions, this is not a new concept. Many of you probably use the I felt, I found, I feel kinds of things, focusing on feelings and helping people see where you're coming from that feels a little less defensive. So using the I statements definitely can be helpful, so that it's not about you pointing fingers at someone else. And, again, just actively listening. So I don't know that I would say, those are different things for family members than others. I think it's just something we have to practice and decide how we want to engage.
A lot of patience.
So-
All of that takes a lot of patience. And I like what you said too about finding ways to have happy or building pleasant, a good common ground in terms of the activities, building that relationship and not letting maybe the conversation overshadow that, depending on what your goals are. We had another good question come through Facebook here. Shara said, could you give some insight into how you think about facilitating conversation? Like how to be sure people in the group are heard, when to push people, and when to let things sit. And she said she has a lot of respect for you, Joy, and seeing your facilitation skills.
So the question again, Shara, thanks for being on the call and listening. Again, I'm very blessed with lots of good folks in my corner. I see several colleagues and friends on the call. So the question from Shara again is what, let me see if I can get to it. Can you?
From the bottom of the, if you'd like, I could reread it.
Yeah, will you reread it? Because I'm not seeing it.
Could you give some insight into how you think about facilitating conversation? Like how to be sure people in the group are heard, and when to push people, and when to let things sit.
Yeah, I think, and Shara I have had the opportunity to facilitate a couple of things for her and with her, and she always says that I'm much better than I am. But I think, one, setting some agreements at the beginning, just, these ground rules or norms, or I've been in some spaces with others that have been facilitating, they've called them comfort agreements, but just sort of on the front end talking about how this conversation is going to go, and one of those that we use a lot is just really reminding people that we all have a responsibility for sharing in this space, right? And so to be mindful of our own voices, and that, like, I'm a person that likes to talk. I tend to have something to say about many things. And so knowing that at times I need to step back if I'm a part of a group, right? Like I need to step back. I need to wait and allow others space to do that. I also think, and these are teacher tricks sometimes, of giving people time, giving everybody time to think about a response before asking for a public response. So for example, if I was, 15 or 20 people in a room, and I want to get a response about a particular thing, I've done index cards where people are just asked to, jot down a response, because it helps build confidence, and then other people feel like they are more prepared to speak versus the person like me that maybe probably didn't spend enough time thinking about what they were going to say before saying it, right? So it gives everybody the chance to get their thoughts together. Also, I think doing sort of smaller groups, like pair and share kinds of things. So typically people are more likely willing to share with one or two other people than they are the 13 or 14 or 15 or 20 people in a larger group. And sometimes that's something you can do to initiate that conversation. So, and then I think calling people, just and modeling, but oftentimes if, one or two people sort of being brave and stepping out, it will invite others to do the same. So I happen to enjoy facilitating, and one, because guess what? It is me getting to hear and listen from other people and not sharing about many of the things myself. So I love to facilitate.
Right, it's a great skill to have. So we have from Hannah, seems like family members, the need for self-reflection is even more important. Stepping back and asking yourself, why am I responding this way? Why do I need to have this conversation? Because so much of how we respond to family members has to do with the layers, history of the relationship, which is, I think, an observation we're speaking about right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, sort of this purpose is definitely true. Dr. Kinzer shared a resource, and if you're not familiar with the Southern Poverty Law Center's work, it's pretty outstanding, but they've got a resource that she stumbled across and has shared, but that really gives some practical examples to how to respond to in a number of different situations and with a number of different individuals. And so that's a great tool and resource to use.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to looking at that one in depth. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Kinzer. That's great. I feel like these days we need all the tools we can get, because situations are so different from place to place and venue to venue.
Well, and that's the other thing I would say too, is that, I don't know that any of this is necessarily cookie cutter. I don't know that you could take this set of tools or this set, I can give we can talk in broad terms, but each individual is an individual, right? And each situation is unique to some degree. And so, I think we can try to arm ourselves with some tools and skill and work to practice and build our confidence, but recognizing that, I might have done something, I might have had the same conversation 5 times earlier and it went great. And then the 6th person, it just doesn't land in the same ways. And some of that's not always on us. I mean, again, I think about this idea around, communications, particularly and actions around social political kinds of pieces, and race is going to be one of those. And I'll just share, this is not a fully race conversation, but, oftentimes people have said things to me that I'm sure they might have said, well, that didn't land well. Well, it's because I probably might have heard it several times, right? Like this was our first encounter, but for me, it's something that I have heard or has been placed on me multiple times. And so I think it's not necessarily about even the person initiating the conversation. It might be about the receiver as well. And so I think, just going into it, knowing that not every situation is going to be the same necessarily. We go in hoping and prepared to try to do our best, to do it from a place of respect, a place of being open and vulnerable and brave. The other thing I would say about this, and I struggled when, and lots of things have happened since, Lisa, you and I talked about doing this talk. And because we've sort of gone down this path of race, I just want to mention a couple of things, is this idea around respectful conversations or civil conversations. I've struggled with some of that personally because at times the conversation, I think in the larger world, dominant culture folks are using those terms to sort of say, I need to check my emotions, right? I need to check my, how I might respond to a particular situation. And so at times, I think about just again, and Julia mentioned the protest and some of those things, but, there is some sense that in certain conversations, there's some value in emotion being present and that understanding where that comes from, and so the civility pieces of conversation are becoming, it's just interesting. I think we have to have this conversation about from what place are we asking people to be civil? Is it so that I am more comfortable, which is sometimes the case, right? I think in marginalized dominant culture kinds of conversations, I think people, the dominant culture wants the marginalized, the oppressed group sometimes to be more respectful or to be more civil in their conversations. And that's so that they feel more comfortable. And so it's an interesting, an interesting concept for, I think, people to consider.
Yeah. And that's,
sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
well, it was just making me think because I hadn't thought about it that way, Joy. That's an insight for me because I was coming more from a position of how thinking about, I guess, white fragility is the term that's, how do I not put a burden on someone from a different race than me to explain to me what their experience is like? And so how do I inquire and ask those questions in a respectful way that doesn't mean you have to do the work to talk to me, where I need to be educating myself, but how do I educate myself without asking questions? And, but I totally see the minute you said that, it's like, oh yeah, it could be, y'all be respectful over there. And
yeah, it's because dominant culture, typically they don't want to be challenged, right? Like,
right.
So I think there are two different things. I want to uplift what you say about the responsibility of the dominant culture, if you will, to educate themselves. I appreciate that. And I think that is important. I think, I am happy to engage in those conversations and I learn, but and welcome folks to, I learn alongside with people. But in theory, that's the beauty again of the library, right? Is we have access to materials and information. So if you want to know what it's like to be Black, if you will, you can get some glimpse of that by reading, right? Or listening,
You can
viewing.
It gives you that window. It's that window into that experience.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And that's whether that's about race, ethnicity, gender identity, socioeconomic status. I mean, all of the pieces and parts of diversity. I think, I would say, you can go Google that, right? I think there is some personal responsibility that we all should take, and it should not be left to the marginalized, oppressed individuals to sort of expose themselves over and over again. It's at their expense. So I think that's a separate thing than this idea of, when people say, and we've seen again a lot of that rhetoric around protests and riots and, just how people have responded to injustices, if you will, doing those in a more civil way. Well, sometimes the civil ways haven't always worked either. And so, again, are we saying that so that we are more comfortable and we are more protected? Just something to consider.
Georgita has a great follow-up question to this. I was going to ask about controlling one's emotions during conversation. Now I will ask, how does one know when to let emotions show? So how do you balance that? Because the other side of that argument could be the civil, what kind of goes back to your, what is the goal of the conversation? So sometimes emotional response, it can maybe turn people off depending if they don't understand where you're coming from, or if they lack that background to that goes back and gives them that perspective. How do you find that balance? How do you find that moment to share your emotions and to be truthful and honest with your experience, so that people are listening to you and so your message is heard?
Yeah, I think those are good. Both of those. I was sitting here thinking about, so one, controlling one's emotions during a conversation. I think if you're able to prepare for the conversation, right? I mean, I think there's definitely been times when I've needed to engage in a conversation that I sort of have walked through the conversation in my head, that has helped probably check a little bit of emotion. And I can tell you, there are probably conversations I need to have right now that I have not had because I will get emotional, right? Like I just know it. And that in getting emotional, will the purpose or the goal, will the conversation be fruitful, if you will, and for either party. And so there are definitely emotion pieces I think are definitely important and something to consider. But, how does one know when to let their emotions show? Sometimes I don't know that you get to control that, and I can appreciate some authenticity, and raw emotion. And I think you sort of, again, perhaps it's a trust piece, right? Like this, is this the first time we've met? And then all of a sudden you're crying hysterically or yelling and screaming, I don't know about that, but maybe, and again, recognizing that we can't always prepare for all conversations, but for some conversations that we can, I think thinking through what's the purpose of the conversation. Maybe it is some practicing and sort of thinking through what's going to be, what are we going to say, and maybe even anticipating some response. I think about, again, when you think about close friends and family members, and again, I know and recognize and have seen, lots of people have lost, if you will, friends and family over the last several months. And so I think thinking about what the goal is for the conversation might help you also prepare and sort of check your emotions. So it's an interesting kind of piece. I think, and I think you can tell when people are genuine too, I mean, it goes back to this whole thing of hijacking the conversation, and some of the white fragility pieces around race for sure is, it's not about you necessarily. And so just being mindful of the, again, goal purpose of the conversations and trying to develop trust and establish a relationship.
And that makes me think about what you said about comfort agreements before you start, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's another good thing too. I think both in terms of the friend family pieces and in this emotion pieces, and
Mm-hmm.
even setting some like, we're just going to talk about this for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, or I'm only going to, enter into this part of the conversation. We're not going to go too deep. I'm just going to start here. And at some time really recognizing when there might be a need to step out of the conversation and walk away. I think is also something that, needs to be put on the table for consideration. Are there other questions out there? What's on people's minds?
We've got a lot of people watching.
We do. It's good.
Bring us your questions. It's Q&A time.
Hello.
Well, I'm curious to hear how, where people have found challenge and sort of how they are, what's their personal experience during this time frame.
We've talked a bit about family, and we've talked a bit about social media, online platforms. Do you want to talk a bit, maybe, Joy, about conversations in the workplace? That might be because that's another place where we have many need for respectful conversations, perhaps.
Yeah, well, there's some.
Oh.
Sorry, I hit the button. There's some people would say you don't have these conversations in the workplace. But I probably am not there totally. I mean, there's definitely some conversations that probably should not be had at the workplace. But as a woman, as a person of color, I'm bringing myself to the workplace, and I'm at work a lot. I'm spending a lot of time at work, and so, for us not to have some conversations around social, political, just about human. For me not to have those conversations just feels weird. Okay. And yes, in COVID, sometimes I'm just in my office, in my square box, not seeing a lot of people, but, outside of the space, I'm interacting with other people and I'm bringing those things to the workspace. And if I'm not seen or recognized, if we're just I just don't know that you can naturally, avoid those conversations. Now, do you need to enter into some of those conversations lightly? And I recognize, I did a couple of panels here on campus with our human resources director, and she and I probably, our lens were different. She was coming from the human resources, more legal side, and she would say, yeah, there's probably, you gotta be wary around some of those conversations. But I over here am like, again, I spend a lot of time with the people I work with, right? And we've established relationships and we've built some trust with one another. And so, I think it depends on the workspace for sure. But I also would say I want to be seen and valued at my workspace, right? I don't want to have to check parts of my identity when I show up in the parking lot, right? Like I don't know that you can do that. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important for us to be creating spaces at work, at home, at play, where we are helping people, that where we're supporting this environment of people feeling affirmed. We use, I've been on campus for a long, long time, and we used to have a requirement for some in-person diversity education for our faculty and staff members, and mixed reviews. There are some folks that obviously just it was not received well. But I appreciated the opportunity to both be a participant and a facilitator in some of those kind of things. But one of the activities that we did was this continuum piece of response, might have even been how it was phrased. But, we would, put the word bigotry on the board and, sort of talk about all the words associated with bigotry. And then we would put acceptance on the board and talk about all the words associated with acceptance. And then affirmation on the board and all the things associated with those terms. And I think all of us can agree that we don't want to be associated with bigotry, right? Like that is negative. That is something that we don't want to be associated with. Most of us would probably say we're accepting people, right? But really accepting, when you start thinking about it, is not, to me, it's not the end goal. And I always use this example when I'm doing diversity training about, and it's a little easier for people to see it, I think, from a lens that's non-human, and then I can switch it to human. But I think, when you think about accepting, parents have accepted country music maybe, or rap, or we accept, certain things, which is really about tolerating, right? The acceptance, it's still limiting. Whereas when we affirm people in our conversation and in our relationships, one, I feel differently even when I say the word. I am probably smiling differently than when I say just accept, but I affirm. And so, I talk about my affirmation for chocolate. I am a big fan of some chocolate. And when I am affirming my chocolate, actually, I'm very particular in how I choose my chocolate. I have a preference, and I oftentimes will put my chocolate, some people put their bread and eggs in that little basket seat. That's where my chocolate goes. I am taking care of my chocolate. I am really treating it, with the most tender, loving care. I even sometimes will, make sure that my chocolate's at a nice temperature, and we'll put it in the refrigerator or freezer.
What's your chocolate preference, Joy?
I love some chocolate. I affirm some chocolate. But, I want to be affirmed as a person as well, right? I want to be affirmed as a person, as a human, as a member of society, as a member of this community, whatever this community might be. And so I think acceptance is we're on that path there for sure. And that's better than the bigotry side. But ultimately, I think there's still some opportunity for us to work in building relationships that are more affirming for people. So when I think about work, again, I want to be seen at work, and I want to be affirmed in all the places, whether that's, again, homework or play.
And I'm going to try to practice one of those reflective skills and say, so when you say you want to feel affirmed at work, you want to be treated with care.
Yes.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah,
Yes.
I want to be treated with care and kindness and respected and welcomed, right? I mean, I think, when we talk about conversations and developing relationships with people, all of us want to be, we want to feel welcomed. And so, I think even, when we talk about conversation, we think of more than a couple of words, but I think it's important for us to, and I need to be reminded of this. And there are some days when literally I probably march to my desk and, barely say hello to a person that I pass, but maybe stopping to take time to recognize one another, to say hello, to, we know the importance of names. Some of us are better with people's names than others. But there's some value in calling people by name. Shara's question even about facilitation, I think that can be helpful. If you I'm interested, Lisa, to hear what you've got to say, you know, or I mean, people want to feel included and valued and as if they belong or have something to contribute. So I think all of those things are a part of this affirming.
And it's a valuing, isn't it, too? Because you really value that chocolate and the fact that it brings something to you.
Right.
It enriches your life, and that's the same thing with the different people in your life. They enrich your life, they enrich your work experience, and appreciation for the role they play and what they bring to the table.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, when we were talking about work conversations earlier, and what I thought about, we come from a public service role. And so you mentioned like avoiding those difficult conversations for the most part, probably is we're treading lightly in the workplace is ideal. Sometimes when we are in a customer service role, you have those conversations thrust upon you. And we get that in the community too. It's you know, you can be just walking around the grocery store and sometimes things will come up, or in line for your groceries. And just what are your thoughts on those conversations that are unwillfully maybe put upon you at times by people you don't know very well?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I think, you know, and sometimes, you know, typically if you wanted to really engage in that conversation, you would probably ask open-ended questions, right? But you may or may not be trying to engage in that conversation or push it or move it forward, right? But I think there is still some acknowledgement of valuing and acknowledging that person's been heard, right? Like, so sounds like you've had a bad day. Maybe, you know, like, I'm sorry, or, you know, is there, you know, I might not be able to do much, but I might be able to connect you with some other people who can, or, you know, it sort of depends on the situation. But I think definitely in those, when I think about the kinds of conversations that you all have, perhaps, you know, thrust upon you, as you say, I think just, you know, sometimes repeating, you know, again, this, it sounds, you know, I hear that you've had a bad day kind of thing, or it sounds as if you've had a bad day. And then sometimes you know, have to think about, again, you know, as much as we can. And again, by hear me clearly, I am not perfect. I have definitely stumbled upon all those things before, but, you know, if we can just validate most of the time. You know, the other thing I think is interesting, we talked early on about this piece where we're always thinking that we need to have a response. And sometimes people aren't looking for any response, you know. It's like, I'm reminded even, you know, from a child parent kind of piece. I don't know how many times that maybe I'm sharing things with a parent, and then they're trying to get, no, I don't need you to do, I just need you to hear me, right? Like, you know, so sometimes it just is, you know, people aren't necessarily expecting as much as we may think they're expecting. You know, people aren't always looking for our advice. People aren't always interested in what Joy has to say. They are really, it's about them, right? They just want to be heard. And so just validating and them, I think, is important. It's not like we've got to be doing something necessarily more than that.
And Dr. Kinzer had a comment, not rushing to offering an answer, but affirming the person and their experience. And that makes me think about another one of these topics that are called conversation blockers, where sometimes out of our own discomfort, we feel like we need to fix something for somebody or minimize it, or there are several of those type things that maybe you or she could expound a little bit more on. They're coming from a helpful place, but it doesn't have the effect.
Yeah, I think, you know, again, it's just this whole thing that we're oftentimes thinking that this stuff is about us, and it's really not, or, you know, changing and shifting the conversation. I mean, you know, again, you know, I do think oftentimes we just need to stay focused on, you know, and again, if we, in conversation, we may even be asking, we may need to ask for clarity about what the need is, right? Like, you know, is there something you would like me to do with this information, right? Like, is there something that, you know, I hear you, what's next kind of piece. So I think just recognizing that sometimes the conversations, that it's not about us, really, it's not about us. But a hearing and, as Dr. Kinzer used the word again, affirming the person and their experience. There are definitely more probably folks on the call that could be in this conversation and offer great wisdom.
We've had
So
wonderful comments and questions coming through. We really appreciate that. It's made for a really enriching conversation. You know, I certainly learned a lot tonight and enjoyed this. This has been, I can definitely see applications in my own life. But one of the things when you were giving that example there about affirming the person and saying something like, it sounds like you've had a difficult day. I've had that come up so many times, and not to make assumptions about people, but a lot of times that's a venting technique. They're just, you know, they've had a hard time and they're releasing the valve, and you just happen to be in the line of the steam as it's coming out. And so it can be difficult being on the receiving end of that. But, you know, it can help sometimes to, and it helps to reframe the conversation and really not to add more to that person when you can use these techniques to step back and try to make it a positive experience for them.
And at times I think, you know, I don't want to lose in it that, you know, for some people they're seeking connection. I mean, again, part of this is recognizing that we all are unique and have different. So I might come to you, but you're the first person I talk to today. I mean, I'm just seeking connection and seeking community or something, you know. And so I definitely, I've had that happen at the grocery store, some where people will, like, I don't know this person from Adam, but and sometimes guess what, there have been great relationships built. I mean, you know, you meet a stranger and then all of a sudden you find common ground and you can build relationships. And, you know, I definitely have met people and, you know, just clicked, if you will, and were able to share in conversation and felt like we'd known each other for a long time when, you know, really it was pretty short. And so I think, you know, sometimes it's just about how we do choose to connect, but sometimes that's about people really seeking community.
Very good. We got a little bit more time here if you have any last questions. This has been, like I said, a wonderful conversation. I really, Joy, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience. And I'm so glad this is our kickoff event to this wonderful reading challenge. This really is a great way to start. And you've given us some tools that I think will help us as we move forward in the next couple of months and really the rest of our lives. These are tools you can use in any conversation situation, and depending whatever the topic is, you know, it's all over the place. You know, we've talked about race, there's politics, there's religion, there's so many areas where we run into those blocks, and you know, building those bridges across the boundaries between us. I like what you just said about the end goal being, you know, building relationships. Dr. Kinzer sent another question through. Do you get feedback from students about what conversations in their classrooms they struggle with? And any advice for faculty, which I think is a great question.
You know, I was thinking about this yesterday, Dr. Kinzer, and so you and I and our friend Dr. Amy Johnson should connect and do some faculty conversations around there's some research out there, or some professional development opportunities, articles, insights that we could gather nationally about the kind of environment that breeds, a stronger democracy, if you will. And I do think that there's an opportunity for faculty to help. We should be having these conversations. We should be encouraging our students to engage with people different from them and to stretch maybe outside their comfort zone. But that, for me, that is what I love about the university, is really the opportunities that it does bring to connect. And I think of the library, I said this, and it's a little aside from Dr. Kinzer's question, but one of the things that I loved about the library, there are very few spaces and places and things that are really open to everybody, right? I mean, there are very few, but the library is really one of those places. And so I think whether you've got $1 million or you got a penny, in non-COVID times, you could walk through the door, right? And I just think it's a beautiful building. It's a beautiful concept that, it really is just this open community center. And I remember we talk a lot about that, and I know you all are, you're doing great work, but I think, I would look forward to opportunities for us to continue to do joint programming where collectively, I think the university, the library, the city, how do we work together to create a community that is encouraging and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I say all of those words. I mean, I think about, and I know we're running on our end of time, but I also would just use this opportunity to talk about, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so as folks are thinking about needing to listen and to hear different voices, I also would challenge you to think about opportunities that you have to advance those voices, right? Like to move them along. And we saw a little bit of that this summer through some of the response to George Floyd's killing, and there's been over this past year a lot of folks making intentional efforts to uplift diverse voices, and particularly Black voices. And but I think thinking through, as those of us who are privileged in whatever way, again, whatever part of our identity, that we think about ways in which we are utilizing that privilege, that influence to support and advance those who don't have that privilege or influence. So I want to be a part of a community. I mean, I think about, ways in why I got involved and how I've gotten involved in community, and I'm living here, right? I'm living here. I want this to be a place where I want to be, and where I feel I want this to become a place where and to be a place where I feel welcomed and a part of, right? I think all of us just have this, it's just a natural thing that we want to be a part of. It starts really early, right? On the playgrounds and such. I mean, we want to be a part of, we want to be included. And again, I would just, challenge folks who, for those of us in our privileged spaces, again, wherever that may be, and recognizing that we can also have, be a member of a dominant culture and have privilege around one part of our identity, but also be oppressed and marginalized in another. And so, but in spaces where I have some privilege and influence, that I use that to try to advance others. So it's one thing to listen and learn from others, but it's also to not use that just solely for our own good, but to use that for a broader common good.
So I think some of my thought about, in thinking about the library and the purpose of the library and what's its role in making community better and stuff, it goes back to a book called The Great Good Place. And it talks about the need in society to have, apart from work and home and church, you need someplace that's really a neutral sphere for people to encounter each other without, in sort of a free and just neutral is the best word I can come up with. So for me personally, that's one of the things that has always driven me as a librarian, is the idea of we absolutely must have those spaces. And I think those spaces have to have some ground rules to them, but they're really incubators, and they're places where culture grows and idea grows and people can encounter each other. And along with that, right now, I think a lot about the need for media literacy and for people to learn fact-checking skills. And those are just kind of, for me personally, my two beacons, and why I feel like it's a privilege to do the job that I do.
Well, Lisa, I appreciate that too. And I think it's so true. And you all, the work of the library is so important right now too. Like you said, I think information sharing is one of those pieces, but the media literacy is one that I would love to talk more about. I think both on campus and in the larger community. I think we have an opportunity and a responsibility to help people build those skills too, around media literacy. And we, I think there's lots of folks, around town that hopefully could get behind something like that. I could sing the praises of the library all day long, and am really, really proud of the work of Julia and all of the team. But the mission or purpose statement of the library, this whole idea of connecting people, ideas, and community, right? Like that's what this is. And so I again would say that the university is a similar kind of space. What was the name? Was that a book that you were referencing?
Yes,
Lisa?
and right now I'm blanking on the author. It's an older book, but it is called The Great Good Place. And his whole thesis was kind of, at one point, like the community, the general store, there were these places where people, and it was the Forum in Greece, or habitually throughout civilization, there have been these kind of neutral public spaces where, in some eras it was the coffee house, where people from different walks could encounter each other without a lot of the structure and the constrictions of, say, it's in my workplace or it's in my church, or and he said when cities people fled cities and went into suburbs, the houses in the suburbs that were kind of built post World War II didn't have those front stoops where people could go and sit, and that was an indication that you were open to somebody strolling by to just stop and say a few words, and that those spaces had just shrunk kind of out of our lives, and that the library was kind of the last great hope for that place.
Yeah, I think that's it. I love that, just the name, The Great Good Place, kind of. I just love that it is. Well, and I think we saw, we do just locally the coffee shop kind of phenomenon. Of course, we were all saddened with Willow Tree's closure, because it was one of those great good places, right? Like, but just community, and I think, I think that the advance of technology, there's beauty in the technology pieces, but I think, I hope we never lose, this idea of the importance of face-to-face communication and connection and community, that technology can supplement all of that. But, we were talking about that in advance of our joining on live, that, there's beauty in us being able to be together virtually tonight. But, and I don't, I think, I don't want that to, I don't think it's one or the other. I think my hope is that outside of COVID, we'll figure out ways to do both. Because I do think that there's been some when we talk about access, I think that's what this technology has provided is information is more accessible. I just saw posted, the whole, I think Tennessee setting a record for overdrive use and such. I mean, that's about technology and accessibility, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, just, I don't physically have to go to the library to get those spaces. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Meg posted it really nice. She said, I heart the library. I'll be reading a checked out new book on Libby, which is one of the their Overdrive app when this wraps up. So there we go. Nice plug for reading. And Maggie and the rest of you out there. Dr. Kinzer posted Ray Aldenberg is the author of The Great Good Place, if you're interested in reading that. The internet seems like it could potentially be a great good place. Unfortunately, sometimes it is a place that is dark and full of terrors, it seems. But there's the opportunity there for sure. And I think all of us, through some of the skills that we've learned tonight here from Joy, can maybe help work towards it being a good third space, a great good place. But this has been wonderful. If you're looking for books to read with this Own Voices Reading Challenge, go ahead and sign up on our platform. It's at jcpltn.beanstack, beanstack.org. It's linked on our library website, jcpl.org. I'll also post a link here. So you can sign up and find activities throughout this Own Voices Reading Challenge, where you can find books on own voices from different marginalized, underrepresented groups that our library staff have put together, and then you can find them on Reads, or you can find them and borrow them through Curbside. I was going to ask, well, Lisa, it sounds like do you have something you wanted to share?
I was just going to say, we've got all kinds of book lists. We could keep you reading for at least 6 months with the book lists that we've made around this. All kinds of diverse voices, experiences, backgrounds, identities, all that stuff. Do yourself a favor, dip in, plunge in. And I think also those links to those book lists are just on our website. So even if you don't register for the challenge, you can take advantage of the book list. So, and please do.
Please do. And so sign up for that, Joy. This has been a joy. Do you have any last thoughts that you want to share with us? Any last
I don't. I just would say thank you. Thanks to all of you. And thanks, Lisa, for the invitation to be on. Again, I don't feel worthy necessarily. I am no expert in this topic, but just appreciate the opportunity to be in community and to learn and grow together. And just thanks for the good work that you all are doing. And I look forward to engaging with some of the Own Voices challenge as well. So thanks for putting it together, and let's not forget about some of the other things we can do together as well. So
exactly. So thank you so much. And I'll say this, one of my definitions of leadership is being willing to go and facilitate things when you feel like you're not the expert. So kudos to you. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks so much. Thanks to all of my friends and family out there who, I have friends who have blogs and they talk about there's probably no readers except their mama kind of thing. That's sort of how I feel tonight. There might not be too many viewers except those few folks that love me. So thanks to all of those taking time to be here tonight and joining the conversation.
It's awesome to have folks that love you. Absolutely.
Thank you all. Thank you.
And thanks to the audience. Thank you all for watching, tuning in, participating, your great questions. We love y'all.
See you in the next one.
That's right. Good night. Thank you, Joy. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Yes, we will. Sounds great. Good night.
Good night.
Yeah. Let's take us off.
All right. Thank you all for being here.
Yes, many, many thanks. Come see us virtually until you can see us live in person.